This is our webinar, so Efficio's webinar on annual value planning for cost optimization. And we've got a Yorkshire Water theme throughout this, as we're using Yorkshire Water as a case study for the work we've done. So quickly, just to introduce myself. So I'm Andrew Deakin, I'm a principal at Efficio. I've got over 10 years procurement experience across industry and consulting. And most of my time at Efficio has been working across a number of our longer term client engagements. Currently leading our Yorkshire Water engagement, working with Andy, who's our kind of key customer.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm Andy Clark. I'm Head of Commercial Services at Yorkshire Water. So I've been working in the environment and utilities sector for a long time. Yorkshire Water is a water and wastewater services company. So we deliver for around 6.5 million customers in the Yorkshire region. So that's that map in the middle there. So we are one of the largest landowners in Yorkshire, and we collect about 1.3 billion litres of raw water every day, which we then treat through some really energy-intensive chemical and physical processes, and then we distribute that back to customers by about 32,000 kilometres of pipe work, so a very large water network. And then in our wastewater business, we collect and treat about 1 billion litres of sewage, over 600 treatment works, so a very disparate base of assets there. And then we transfer that sewage through 52,000 kilometres of sewers across the region. So again, a very large network. We've worked in partnership with Efficio since about 2022, and it was initially on an ad hoc basis, a few tenders and a few categories. But that led ultimately to a managed service for all our strategic sourcing needs. So Efficio sit alongside a variety of in-house capabilities that we have that make up the commercial life cycle. So that's that bottom right image there, where we've got in-house functions such as procure to pay and contract management and commercial assurance. So alongside running tenders, Efficio also support our commercial transformation across the function in lots of different ways, which we can touch on as we go through this.
Thank you, Andy. So just to go through quickly the objectives of the session today. So we're going to talk about how annual value planning is a kind of key part of how leading procurement organizations operate. And we'll take you through a number of different points. So hopefully by the end of the session, you'll understand the importance of creating and maintaining an annual value plan to the success of procurement. You should learn how to build that plan credibly, but without boiling the ocean. You should also understand how to use the process of both creating the plan and the output that you get at the end of that planning process to improve business relationships and secure the buy-in to procurement. And also have heard how, particularly using the Yorkshire Water example, how you can use that plan to make the case for investment in procurement. And as I said, throughout this, we'll have a theme of Yorkshire Water woven through to give you a real life case study into what can be achieved. Just before we move into the content, we have got Q&A functionality, so we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end of the session for questions. If you just submit them through the Q&A portal, we'll get to them all at the end and hopefully cover as many as we can. So without further ado, before we kind of delve into what is a plan, we wanted to just talk you through what Efficio see particularly as common issues in clients that planning can help resolve. So there's a few common ones that I think many procurement people will recognise and have seen in their careers. Firstly, procurement being seen by the business as a bottleneck. There's a vicious cycle that's often found where business needs come into the function too late, and that means that procurement are only really able to slow things down. There's a lack of ability to add value to the ask, and so it continues to kind of push procurement down into a customer serving function rather than a partnering function, which limits the value that can be brought. I think again, procurement not being recognised as adding value to the business is a common theme. There's a couple of symptoms, a couple of reasons why we see this regularly. One is not even measuring value and communicating that out in the first place, which is an obvious one. But equally, even where value is measured, if that's not integrated into the budgeting cycle, it's not integrated into business plans, then you'll get this age-old statement. That is a common perception that drives procurement to be seen as a cost rather than a value center. The other thing that we regularly see is procurement being overly focused on compliance rather than the commercial value that they can bring to the business. I think there's a common feeling that the right process must be followed, and that's the kind of value from a governance and compliance perspective that procurement bring. But in our view, the best procurement functions are really focused more on the commercial expertise, the commercial value that can be brought to a process. And that's really how procurement gets elevated in the business, is by being that value focused function. And then finally, procurement teams that are regularly lacking in capacity, so they end up stuck in the weeds doing the kind of keep the lights on activities and failing to step up into really strategic delivery beyond even sourcing, which can leverage those commercial skill sets I just spoke about. And I think that extends often to the business as well, in that they struggle to support procurement activity, and it just leads to this slowing down and extending of timescales when, again, the best procurement functions are fast, they're agile, and they're delivering value within that context. We've seen that in the middle as well as some research that we've done through our Bridging the Gap Sustainability report, which if you haven't seen, I'd recommend reading. I think this, the research that we emphasize at this point around procurement not being seen as a kind of elevated, value-orientated function, and there's a need for procurement to kind of change that perception. Andy, do these challenges resonate with you? Is this something you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I think back to the start of our transformation, then procurement was definitely something that the business would engage with because they had to organise a contract or to organise payment, rather than because people actually wanted to or thought it would add value. I definitely recognise the point about being very reactive. We'd typically be engaged when all the thinking had been done. People had a supplier in mind, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. They didn't want help deciding what to do, they just wanted to help actioning what they'd already decided. So I would say that procurement at that point was very much a necessary process about following company rules, but not really adding value. Seeking opinion on how to adapt the company side in particular, because obviously procurement is a combination of what the supply chain can offer, but also how you can organize yourself as a business. It would be very rare for that to be a conversation that procurement were part of. I think there's often genuine confusion from the business about how to engage, and particularly because our business is covered by the utilities contract regs, genuine confusion in the business about what we can and can't do as well. So there's definitely a job for procurement to be out there and actively talking. I do believe, though, that part of the reason it was like that for us is that you reap what you sow. And if procurement colleagues act in a subservient way, always asking for permission and not making clear data-driven recommendations, then they are likely to be treated as just a service provider. And certainly when I look back to that, I think we often acted like that. Senior engagement was definitely an issue. So, that survey feedback that you were getting, I really agree with that. A lack of understanding about the supply chain the business has, a lack of interest in the contracts being let, which is strange on the one hand when you think about how much money is spent through the supply chain and how challenged budgets generally are. But I do think we as procurement professionals do need to remember that no business exists to buy goods and services. So the fact that other people focus on the core purpose of the business shouldn't really be a surprise to us. And actually what senior colleagues need is help to understand what that opportunity is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy as procurement professionals to get a bit bogged down in the mindset that no one values you, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? Yeah. Where you're frustrated with the business. I think there's often quite a guarded nature to talking about what can and can't be done within procurement as well, and the kind of process to follow. So demystifying it as well helps with engagement. But,
yeah.
Good. I was going to use my first tortured Valentine's Day analogy. So this is a bit like, I think, if you wait for the business to come to you, and the business in this case is your beloved partner, with a Valentine's Day present on Valentine's Day morning, then the only options available to you are go to the garage and get some wilted flowers and maybe a poor box of chocolates. With appropriate planning and maybe engagement, you could go on a nice weekend away. Your business relationships, i.e. your partnership, will be much better, and you'll hopefully have much more fun out of it yourself. I think that just about works.
I think you go away with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So next, let's move on to what an effective plan needs. So we've heard a little bit about what it's trying to resolve, but I think this is more than just a list of things that needs to be done. So we do sometimes come into procurement functions and see what's given to us as the plan. We've got a procurement plan. Look how great we are, but it's rarely kind of ticking all these boxes, and that's why kind of fleshing this out a bit more I think is really useful. So it should be, first of all, a detailed list of procurement activities for the coming year. It shouldn't be too long in a distance, because that's a kind of lack of flexibility and lack of change, and you won't cover everything accurately enough. But equally, planning to your business cycle and doing this on an annual basis, I think, is really important to make sure that you've got a full year plan. And the key message about doing this annually and doing it in detail is that procurement's never done. It's very easy, particularly in a transformation environment, for the business to see procurement as, let's do this one-off change, let's get a load of value, and then we're back to having a tactical reactive function that just does things when we want them to. We've seen, I think, at Yorkshire Water, Andy, that you can sustain that transformation momentum by following a process like this if you have the right structure behind it and do this regularly enough. I think equally, making sure that the initiatives, the activities within that plan are sized from an effort and a benefits perspective. That really demonstrates that you're a mature business partner. First of all, it makes you challenge what work you're actually doing. So there's things that I think procurement professionals like to do long processes for, because they feel comfortable about renewing that process or renewing that contract. But if there's no value in it, then there's probably better and faster ways to get a new contract in place, or deliver that good or service, and focus on where you're actually adding value to the business. And that's not necessarily just from savings either. There's sustainability benefits, there's operational improvement benefits, and you should be mapping all those against the activities. I think the other thing is about trying to get, as far as possible, the business to feel like they jointly own this plan. So they shouldn't just input ideas to it, but they should be asked to sign off on the output. They should understand their role in actually resourcing the plan as well. It's very rare that procurement people can deliver the best value that they need to by just doing an activity in isolation. We're a function that partners with other business stakeholders to get things done, and so you need them to be brought into the plan as much as procurement are.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? And when I look back, people would often talk to us in procurement and say, you've got this procurement target to achieve. And the point, I think, when you're starting to get somewhere with this, is when people talk about our target. It's something that we've got to achieve. And I think it recognises that procurement can't and shouldn't buy anything on their own in isolation from the business, because we'll make mistakes. But also the business has got a great contribution to making savings, whether that's looking at specifications or looking at service requirements that we might have, or adapting the business side of things to lower the costs in the supply chain. When you get that recognition that this is a joint activity, that's when you really feel like you're making progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the having it as part of the annual budgeting cycles as well forms part of that. So if you're talking to the business about this at a point when they can't really influence their own capacity and their own budgets, and the benefit doesn't feel real to them, then it becomes much harder to have that buy-in and that engagement. But the business goes through a natural planning cycle, usually every year anyway. So if procurement are integrated and aligned to that, then it can make that joint ownership much easier, and make sure that procurement is seen as adding that value. Procurement costs and procurement value are integrated into that budgetary plan. Right, so let's move on to how to create the plan. We regularly get told by procurement people it's too hard. So I think people conceptually understand that having a plan is a good thing, but feel that perhaps like getting a plan down that's going to actually cover everything that they need to do is too hard, often because of poor data or a lack of structure behind the question. So hopefully this, we won't go into loads of detail, but this will give everyone a bit of an idea of how to actually create that plan from scratch. And this is a process that we've been through with you at Yorkshire Water, isn't it, Andy? So we can talk a little bit about your experience of this.
Yeah.
So the first step is data collection. So I'm expecting some eye rolls that I can't see amongst the audience for this one, because procurement never have the data that they need at their fingertips, or very rarely. But I think that shouldn't be a barrier to trying to get some data to begin with, because there's usually, whether it's actually in a structured database or in Word documents that you might have to trawl through, pulling out contract expiry data, areas of high spend against categories, things, existing procurement plans, again, that might just be written down in people's notepads of things that they'd like to do within their category. Pulling all that into one place is a really powerful starting point to building this plan out. But don't feel if you can't get all of that data that stops you progressing. So what you should do is you should build on what you can get, and then start working with the expertise that you've got both within the function and within the business on what the business needs are, what the procurement needs are, to flesh out that plan. So that lived experience of the business and procurement is often as powerful, if not more powerful, than the data itself. People who understand their area typically know areas of inefficiency, areas of opportunity, and are eager to go after it. They just need the right engagement, the right structured engagement to get that into the plan. We followed, and we do every year now, follow a kind of an interview process effectively, where we go out to business teams and to the kind of category experts that we've got in our partnership, and pull out all of the ideas that have been sat mulling in the back of people's mind, or maybe they've got in a plan somewhere but not in the procurement plan, to fold those into our potential delivery. And all of that is about producing as long a list as possible of potential things to go at for the year. And then you come on to this benefit sizing. So you should be estimating how much effort from procurement and a business perspective it's going to take to actually deliver that. So in terms of days per week or FTE, however you want to size your teams, use that type of metric and have that alongside the scale of the value that you expect to deliver as well. So savings is an obvious one, but as we spoke about before, sustainability benefits, operational efficiency improvements, things like that, you should also overlay into this. What that then does to start prioritizing those opportunities. So as we said, don't just do everything that procurement think they need to do, but go through and actually challenge that I've set out in this plan. And then finally, use that challenge plan to socialize with the business and make the case for change, which Andy's going to come on to a little bit more in a second. I think the fact that you've already gone through the internal prioritization is really critical, rather than waiting for the business to challenge, because you want to be seen as a mature, scrutinized function that can welcome that scrutiny in, but also scrutinizes itself. Everyone else in the business will be going through their own efficiency challenges and have to make tough decisions on what work gets done and what work doesn't. And I think procurement needs to be seen to be in as I said, in the trenches with the business on that. Andy, how have you found this from your perspective, and got any key learnings or takeaways for people?
Yeah, so it's definitely much more proactive than what I think back to what we had before annual value planning, which was generally you would just talk about the cycle of contracts coming to an end. So this is much more proactive. It really gets procurement into the heart of the action. I think it gets procurement into the place where people are thinking strategically, because particularly our colleagues in operational roles are challenged by the day-to-day, and that's a very busy area for them. So to try and ask them to think strategically long-term about the supply chain is quite hard. When you're in an annual value planning and business planning process, people have made time for that. They're in the right headspace and they are thinking further ahead. I think it's effective in particular versus the past as well, because it makes it less likely that procurement are going to get some unattributed targets. So it is quite often the case that procurement would get a target as part of a balancing figure in the business planning. So if budgets couldn't be achieved, an amount will be carved off and said that's now a procurement target. And that happens much less, and it's a much lower number if you're on the front foot and you've got an AVP that's operating on a bottom-up basis and delivering numbers into the plan. It's much more proactive, and it allows us to actually drive that conversation. I think it builds a better working relationship with finance also. Finance are one of our key stakeholders, and and probably the one that I would have said I overlooked in it initially, because finance aren't actually a partner of ours, that they aren't coming to us needing goods and services, but that they're absolutely key to making annual value planning working, because they're working with the business on the size of their budgets, and making that connection between the two is really helpful for finance. If you're not careful, you can get in a position with finance colleagues where if you make a saving in the future, that actually can be difficult for them to deal with, because they've got to account for that and see how it related to a budget that they set. It's much easier for them to work with them at the start and say, these are the savings that we're targeting, and then they can try and feature that into budgets. So I think the main thing I would observe about it, I think it moves the conversation from that hamster wheel that I mentioned about contract reletting driving our work, and it gets procurement into a conversation about the whole cost base of an area. Because we're not only interested in saying the contract's come to an end, can we do it for a bit less? We're interested in saying, have we got the outsource in-source mix right here? What's happening with our demand? What's happening with contracts that are not due for a relet but perhaps underperforming? It gets us into all of that conversation, and we can have much more of an impact. I think it also helps with our colleagues in terms of trying to secure resource from them. All procurement people will realise that if you can't get access to good people in the business to help with evaluation and specification, that can be a really laborious process, and it can really slow us down. If you can get into annual value planning and do it correctly, you can actually get people expecting procurement to be coming and carving out some time in the future for that. And it can attack that idea that people might come back and say, it's not my job to help procurement, which is one of the things that we do see, and that really holds us up in terms of getting to that value that we're seeking.
I think it's definitely been it's an iterative process as well, isn't it? So when we first tried to create one of these, I think we struggled to get the right type of engagement from certain business teams who weren't maybe used to being asked the question. But over the years, as we've gone through multiple cycles of this, I think people they are expecting around budgeting time, we're going to get a bit of time with procurement where we get to put everything out on the table that we're frustrated with or think could be improved, and really use procurement as a tool to help them achieve their goals as well, which has been really positive. And now we're seeing, as you said, then some of our best ideas are coming from the business just wanting to do something completely differently, and scoping that out with them and helping them deliver that with the commercial expertise that we've got, rather than we've got a contract that's inefficient and we're just going to improve that.
It grows the expectation, doesn't it, on what procurement's contribution is? Because I think at first people think it's perhaps getting what they want for less, and then that goes right through to something which is actually, it's not even a tender related activity. It gets procurement into the conversation about how we operate our business, and that's a fundamentally different place to be.
Absolutely. Great. I think next, you're just going to talk a little bit about the socialization point in a bit more details, how you kind of use the plan to change procurement's positioning. Yeah,
absolutely. So I mentioned transformation a couple of times. So we are actively trying to work our way through this maturity scale, and we're actively targeting getting procurement into that advanced position. We've looked at this recently, and actually, when you look at it, you tend to find some of your businesses at one point in the maturity scale, and some of it is in others, depending on what you're buying for. But we're aspiring to get into that advanced area. Annual value planning is an important part of this transformation. It's a key part of that change is, like I mentioned before, reactive to proactive, but it's also service provider to equal partner. It's moving from responding to the business to setting the agenda for activity. And these are all steps that are happening on this maturity curve here. The AVP process starts the conversation with the business at the right point in the cycle. So it's at the point when they're trying to set budgets, but also the point in which they're asking themselves questions about how they're set up, how they deploy their own resources. So, so it's a really good place to start the conversation. It really allows procurement to understand what the business drivers are for the following year, and to make intervention that is beyond tenders, but in terms of the cost base as a whole. It does need a level of entry into the conversation though to allow that to happen. So it's likely that you would need to demonstrate some value first to establish legitimacy for the function. So something that we certainly found was we had to get some early successes from what we've done, and we had to not be afraid to talk about those, to publicize the savings that we've made or the change in commercial model that we've made. Historically, we've been, I think, preoccupied by focusing on getting work out the door and being compliant, and a little bit reluctant to go and talk about our successes because perhaps we just weren't used to that sort of internal sales conversation. But actually, it's not a self-gratifying process. It's a process of actually saying, we can help you more if you help us. And here's an example. And we've done a lot more of that. We've got in there and had successes and talked about them. It's really important for that entry to be professional and transparent in how savings are calculated, because this kind of transformation can be really stopped if people just don't believe that the savings you're talking about are real. So it's got to be grounded in science and data. And as Andrew was talking about before, it's not about boiling the ocean here and being absolutely to the pound completely accurate on everything. But if there's not a sound basis for things, if people aren't seeing the impact of it, it's very hard to get that entry and the ability to go and talk to people more about it. Aligned to the change that we made, we also brought in a business partner model, which has a commercial colleague sat in leadership teams around our business. And that's really important to develop that relationship and to be in the place where the conversations are happening, and for people to expect to talk to you at the start of a process, not at the end of it. As I previously mentioned as well, it really strengthens the relationship with finance. I think Andrew mentioned this, but the worst thing for procurement is if savings are thought not to be real. And all the conversation, if you're not careful, can end up being about that. Is this a real saving? Not actually driving and making further savings. It's also in the finance relationship, it's critical to understand the relationship between the actual cost base in the business and how budgets are set. And initially on our journey, we didn't understand that well enough, and that caused friction with our colleagues in finance, and it caused a lack of effort going into the best places. So, fixing that, seeing finance as a key partner really helps with this. And then the final point I'd make is about ownership and sign off. So having the AVP signed off in the business planning process by the executive really helps get to that position of, we have a target here, which is our target that achieves what our business needs. It's not a procurement target off to one side that no one really believes is going to happen, and that it's just a number arrived at to make the budget balance. It's all about ownership and joint working on that. That gives you a positive feeling, but when it then comes to delivering it in the next year, it's teamwork that does that. It's not just procurement's problem.
Absolutely. I think it's a really simple change that can actually shift quite a lot of relationships and the perception of procurement quite quickly. So I know we've done a lot of transformation around this, but I think the value plan has been the basis for shifting left in the conversation and shifting right up the maturity scale to enable us to deliver a lot of the rest of the transformation and the ongoing value that we deliver to the business as well. And I think finally, anticipating a potential question here, we just wanted to go through how to manage change with the plan. So this has all been about kind of creating that plan ready for the start of a fiscal year. I think we've got to acknowledge that shifting priorities is inevitable. And I think actually it's good. It's a good thing to do to be able to show that flexibility and adapt to changing business needs. Part of the point of value planning is that you should have fewer kind of urgent ad hoc requirements that you don't know about, but in any business environment, you are going to get those, and being able to be responsive to that is important. So what we suggest here is some ways to kind of manage the change within the plan from that starting point. So you've built a prioritization approach through the methodology that we spoke about before, making sure that any new ideas that come in are collected in a standardized way and are assessed using the same prioritization methodology is absolutely key. So you can then make value-based judgments on how to best utilize the resources that you've got within the team. I think you're always focused on delivering the absolute best value, maximum utilization. And I think usually we find that pushes procurement and the work we're doing with the business into the more strategic areas rather than the more tactical, because those typically are delivering the best value for the business. I think for me as well, that reinforces the value of the function throughout the year as you get people coming and saying, I've got this business need, and you can kind of incorporate that into your plan. I think we run fortnightly change control boards to make sure that we're capturing any change that comes through the plan. There's not always anything to talk about, but we've got that availability to be responsive, and we do ad hoc ones occasionally as well. So it's important that you follow that structured process that you've already designed during the plan to make sure that you don't just have a voice who's shouting the loudest, kind of overlaying themselves onto the plan and making you do something that maybe isn't the optimal way of doing it or the optimal thing to do at that time. One thing we've done to enable that as well is we've built out an eFlow tool, so an Efficio tool, and adapted that to be able to manage this prioritization process using data, which I think gives us a really powerful kind of visual way of managing capacity and managing feedback to the business if we don't have capacity, because we know we don't have capacity, and or we can say when we do. And then I think finally, you just iterate that plan, you adjust people's targets and your targets out to the business if required, and it just becomes a new AVP. So it's a really simple process for kind of continually iterating the plan rather than seeing it as a static, this is our year and we're only doing this year. I'm just conscious of where you think we've
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I'd say is that it's likely that the business that anyone works with is going to have to respond to shocks and challenges and won't be able to be as planned as they would like to be. I think procurement needs to be responsive to jump onto business challenges such as reduced budgets or service issues that could come up. If we were to stick to a plan rigidly, then we wouldn't really all be in it together with our colleagues in the business. It's also true that data quality could be variable and things could come up that we weren't expecting, and that could cause some challenges to assumptions that we've made behind our tenders. So I think change is something we expect to have to do. There's an example. There was a time when we had to reprioritize our procurement effort as the business had identified an issue with a big budget overspend in an area. So this needed us to really have a look into that, investigate on that and the prioritization of work into the supply chain. And the reason I think it was important for us to jump onto that one is that it was an example of us being invited in and requested for support outside of tenders. And as you work through that maturity process, I think, again, that's when you know you're making progress. When you're part of a solution like that, which is saying, look at my area of the business, help me understand why I'm overspending and what we can do about it. So that was a change that we had to make, but actually went really well. And we had some credit for that. And then we're invited into similar things, which was really positive. And then in the second example, we had an area with a service challenge, and the business was keen to consider whether outsourcing could be an opportunity for us to have a look at. So it was a lot of work for us to undertake, and we needed to replan, but it was a real demonstration of procurement driving a strategy and being involved at the earliest part of a conversation. So again, something I was really keen for us to jump on, and it's an opportunity for us to deliver expertise in that kind of a scenario and really leverage off our Efficio relationship. Because one of the benefits of having Efficio on board is that when some very specific piece of work comes up, outsourcing in a particular area, Efficio probably got an SME for that and can bring that in targeted for a period of time and add value. So always keen to jump on those kind of opportunities, because the opposite would be to say to the business, oh, I'm sorry, I've got this plan for the year and it's now.
Absolutely. Nice little plug for Efficio there. Thank you. So I think we'll go on to the questions. We've got about 7 minutes to go through some questions. So the first one that's come through is about what do you do if the business is not engaging with you on this? Like, how do you actually get that engagement from the business if they're a bit resistant to the annual value planning process? Do you want to
Yeah,
take this one?
yeah, I think so. I think it's really about some of the things I said previously, where it is being close to people. So having a structure where people understand who they can speak to in procurement, and that person is available and engaged in the right conversations. I think it's not behaving in that way I mentioned, where you can behave in a subservient way and then be treated as that. So having those good conversations. I think early delivery of successes, so making commercial improvement, so that you're talking to people about what you've actually done and you can do more of, rather than something theoretically that you could introduce would help. Where we initially got pushback, I think there's no silver bullet here. I think it's just about being resilient. It's about keeping in the conversation. It's about trying to really get in and deliver for people, so that if someone's a bit skeptical, that they're feeling it more and more isolated over time, and it's just them that's feeling like that, and other colleagues are saying, well, I'm getting a good result here and I'm going to use more of this. So I think it's kind of success building success. I think there's no easy answers in it. It's hard work. It's getting into the conversation, it's challenging any feedback that you get which isn't positive, and just being good, resilient procurement people about it, and bringing that energy and enthusiasm will eventually win people over, in my experience.
Yeah, I think that point we said it earlier, I think, but about this is a change that will kind of improve over time as well. So you don't need to bring everyone on the journey at the same speed. You'll have early adopters, and you'll have people who lag behind, and you need to kind of treat them individually, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question is, how do you actually measure the benefits and the effort? So Ramon didn't go into that in as much detail. I can give my perspective on this, and then you can add in as well. So there's a couple of ways that we've done this from an effort perspective. One is simply speaking to the teams who are delivering at the moment and using a kind of ready reckoner style approach for the different approaches that we use. So whether you're doing sourcing or a negotiation or an in-source outsource case Andy was talking about before, you can usually kind of refer to previous processes for an example of how long that might take. We've also, because of the transformation work that we've been doing, we've got benchmarks from Efficio and our internal targets for timescales that we can fold into that as well, so that we're setting an improvement target on ourselves within the plan to manage capacity. And I think from a benefits perspective, it's very similar. We refer to work that we've done previously to scale it, but we also fold in Efficio's benchmarking database, the SMEs that Andy was referring to earlier, subject matter experts, to kind of overlay all of that potential insight. I think we can say as well, there's third-party tools that we've referred to, which can also give guidance on the expected savings or sustainability benefits that you can get from different processes. So use what you can and use your own knowledge as well. But I think at some point you have to set yourself a target, and then you have to work to that target.
I think all I'd add to that is to say, keep it as simple as you can and be as transparent as you can about it. So as much as possible, then savings should be old cost versus new cost. We seek to be transparent about it by having a savings methodology that we make available to people, and we need sign-offs of our savings, and that's bringing in the relevant people. So if you can be as transparent as you can about it, then it avoids a feeling that these things are just invented.
Yeah, absolutely. I think final question as well. Someone's asked whether the structure of an organization, whether it's siloed or divisional, etc., might impact the ability to do this process. I think for me, every business goes through a business planning, budgeting cycle. So you can always integrate with that regardless of how siloed the different divisions are. You might just need to engage either at a different level or split your plan up to engage in chunks to make that land with the way that the business is aligned. But procurement should always be focused on kind of having this rolled up plan that covers all areas.
Yeah, I think there's probably an argument to say ideally a business would be set up against a process. so that when you're procuring for something, everybody that you want to engage with is all within one area, essentially reporting under one person. But the reality is, I don't think I've ever seen that. So procurement, I think, have got to work hard internally to draw the various people who are involved in anything together and to understand what that demand is across the business, find out the specification areas for things, and then really be resilient about pulling those folks in together, looking at the big picture, challenging some of the technical stakeholders if it's not adding value. So I think organizational structure can help, but inevitably it's not always set up in the way procurement would like, and our job is to make the connections where the organization doesn't sort of naturally make them.
Yeah, a very good answer, I think.
Thank you.
So I'm just conscious of time. There's probably a few more questions that we could go through, but we won't have the chance now. So just to wrap up, there's a few key takeaways that we wanted to share. So hopefully you've learned what you wanted to from this session, but effectively the takeaways are annual planning is essential to delivering value. So it's only through that conscious planning and the targeting and the resourcing that you can achieve the potential that procurement have. That creating the plan doesn't need to be massively laborious, and you can fill the gaps in data with intelligence and expertise, both internal and external. You can use the plan to be really effective around your business engagement, and actually that's one of the main benefits of the plan is the way that it changes the perception of the business or the business have around procurement. The simple change, if we were going to recommend one thing for every procurement team to do if they're not already, is this annual value planning, because it can really elevate procurement and help sustain the momentum that you hopefully have built around procurement change. We didn't have a chance to go through all questions, so we've got our details up there if anyone wants to ask for any follow-up queries or anything like that. I think both Andy and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
And obviously, if anyone wants to speak about how Efficio can support with the annual value planning process, then feel free to get in touch. Thank you for dialing in on Valentine's Day. Wasn't
Yeah,
quite
thanks for
romantic
listening.
as it could have been, but I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks all.